Greetings, everyone, and welcome to another installment of City Lights Live. I'm your host, Peter Maravellis, and tonight, City Lights and Coffee House Press are delighted to bring you National Book Award-winning author Daniel Borzutzky, celebrating the publication of his new collection, The Murmuring Grief of the Americas. It is, of course, published by Coffee House Press. Daniel Borzutzky is a poet and translator. His 2016 collection, The Performance of Becoming Human, received the National Book Award. His collection, Lake Michigan, was a finalist for the Griffin International Poetry Prize. His most recent translation is Paula Ilabaca Nuñez's The Loose Pearl, winner of the Penn Award for Poetry in Translation. He teaches English and Latin American and Latino studies at the University of Illinois at Chicago. He's going to be joined tonight in conversation by Ricardo Alberto Maldonado. He is the author of the book The Life Assignment, published by Four Way Books, also the translator of Dina Piera Di Donato's Collaterales and Collateral, published by Akashic Books' National Poetry Series. He's also the co-editor of Puerto Rico en Mi Corazón from Anomalous Press, which is a bilingual anthology that raises funds for grassroots recovery efforts in Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria. He also serves as the Academy of American Poets president and executive director. He was born and raised in Puerto Rico. Before we begin, as is customary at the outset of each event, I would like to acknowledge that we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Ohlone people, aka the San Francisco Bay Area. I'd like to take this moment to offer our respect to those who have come before us as stewards of the land. So please join us now in offering a warm welcome to Daniel Borzutzky and Ricardo Alberto Maldonado. Gentlemen, welcome to City Lights. It is such a pleasure.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you so much. And thanks to everybody at City Lights for making this happen. And thanks to everyone in the audience who's with us tonight. And of course, to Ricky, who is so kind to host us, even though he has COVID. So big round of applause, and send lots of love and warm feelings to Ricky. Ricky, how you doing?
I'm not on mute. Hey, good to be here with you. Shall we start with a question, or shall we have you read a few poems and then dive in?
No, let's start with a reading and then dive in. I think that is a great idea. And I want to just say, for people, just in case people leave early, if I wanted to, I'm going to put in the chat. Oh, this is a long link. The link to the GoFundMe page for East Bay booksellers in Oakland, who 2 days ago had a really terrible fire that burned the store and all of their stock. Please consider giving to East Bay Books. On August 12th, myself, Rachel Galvin, and Tongo Eisen Martin will be doing a reading at Gilman Brewery in Berkeley that East Bay is hosting. If you're in the Bay Area, please come. It will also be a fundraiser for the bookstore as well. Right. And thanks, of course, to Coffee House Press and everybody from the press who's here and for making this happen, and to all the unseen labor that goes into making City Lights and Coffee House happen. Much love to all of you. All right, I'm gonna read two pieces to start us off from The Murmuring Grief of the Americas. This first one is called Apparatus 519. The part, the whole, the dead, the corpse, the foot, the light, the flesh. The wage, the worker, the regulator, the lie in the code of the body. It broke on the edge of itself. I did not know what I knew was true, that my eyes were blank, that my face was blank, that my bone was blank, that my body was owned by the shareholders, that the body was just meat now, that the body was just debt now, that time death was murmuring so loud, and I could only hear the dead rain, the squeak, the buzz, the machine, the breath, the hatred, the fumble, the finger, the blow, the key, the sun, the brain, the bubbling, the cooling, the box, the space, the fold, the silence, the plank. I dropped all my capital in the supermarket. I was a young language with no verbs. I saw my stitches photographed from the inside. The police touched me frankly, so directly. They took me to the mask, the shield, the armor, the stone that's placed on the grave, the body that's left in the ground, the mountain they moved to the city, the beach that sank in the city, the river that lost its water, the lake that lost its waves, the missing horizon, the missing halo, the children that disappeared into the face of time, the tower, the fire, the prose, the sticks, the woods, the foreclosed mountain we climbed before they threw us into, another Wednesday, another Tuesday, another Monday. It's cruel to pray out loud, cruel to pray to a God who loves so discriminately, cruel to eat in public, cruel to sing when your neighbors can't speak, moan, or whisper to the birth that refuses to drop, the death that refuses to rattle, the leg that refuses paralysis. Trust the hammer, but lose the nail. Have faith in the hour, but not the minutes. Don't speak the failed word, the wound word, if it's witness to the frozen, the frosted, the fickle, the inspected, the inspector, the hopeful, the hopeless, the crumbling, the growing, the decaying, the rooting, the sowing, the consuming, the fluid, the formal, the industrious, the callous, the lazy, the blank at the moment of blank. Be empty again. Disguise your breath. Disguise the sponge that sops up the water. Disguise the body that destroys its bones, the body that fears its own fingers, the concrete flesh, the privatized flesh, the bank flesh, the murmuring blankness, the exhaustion, suffering, the numbing, the weathering. I remember honey, but it's gone now. I remember seeds, but we have so few now. I remember the grass and the beach and the river, the bees and the ice, the lake and the mountains and its brokers, its board members, its collateral, its assets, its insurance, its expansion, its reduction. We cataloged the glaciers before they disappeared. We returned the earth to the investors, the anxiety to the anxious, the babies to the umbilical cords, the blood to the state and the bank. I will read one more. Ricky, am I visible?
Yes, you are.
Because I'm only seeing you. Oh, there I am. Okay. I'll read one more and then we'll chat. This is called A Performance of Becoming Human, number 418. Excuse me, sir, what time is the massacre? Welcome to the Air Breath Death Theater. Here we are in the Air Breath Death Theater. I drone away at my life in the Air Breath Death Theater. I drone away at my breath death in the Air Breath Death Theater. The episodes blast up like birds. The critics there to kill the coup of the imagination. The flowers fall flat on my head and the invisible body flings them from the balcony of the Air Breath Death Theater. I am dead in the morning of the Air Breath Death Theater. I am flat in the morning and there are so many books falling in the Air Breath Death Theater. They fall across the bodies of the dead. There are deserts in the mouths of the forgotten audience members in the Air Breath Death Theater. The mouths are like reduced mouths in the Air Breath Death Theater. We try to forget when we see the story of our breath moving backwards in the Air Death Breath Theater. The translation of our breath moving from side to side against the bodies that backtrack into the backstory of a back life, a backbeat, a refusal to move, a refusal to translate, a refusal to make the breath knowable from one body to another, from one nation to another. The performance of becoming less human in the Air Breath Death Theater. Aquí no hay epifaños, aquí hay puro silencio y los cuerpos caen y caen. The movement from human to less human, from humane to more humane is not graspable. It runs mouth to mouth. It runs breath to breath. It runs death to death. It boils and runs and blooms and dies and forgets and revenges and robs and runs and boils and runs and grows and forgets and revenges. And we, the performers in the air breath death theater, build a life inside the ceremony of refusal, the ceremony that begins with a little village wiping bomb blast, the bombast, the bombed ass, the bomb in the bottom of history, la bomba en el culo del mundo, the body in the shame mouth of history, la bomba en la boca del cuerpo solitario, and the shaking hands in the exploding bodies. The death performers run with fear, they run with frenzy, they air breath death theater into an unspoken desire to reunite the self with the self with the other self, the face with the other face, the grief with the collective grief, the shame with the collective shame. Desapareció la piña, desapareció el aguacate, las abejas desaparecieron, no hay un horizonte sobre el lago, no hay agua en la noche de petróleo. Shame, how it dots the map, a colony of imperial dung, it dots the map, it is a colony of imperial dung, flung from the mountain moaning in the middle of the city, in the middle of the empire, in the middle of the shame mouth, in the middle of the air breath death theater. This is the road that leads to the theater. This is the road that hides a forgotten massacre. Una gramática doloroso no se mira en la boca. It is the road, it hides a future forgotten massacre. It is the road, it hides a resurrection. It is a road, it hides the buckling of the earth, the breaking of the pavement, the collapsing of the highway. It is a road, it hides a future massacre within a past massacre. Is that a body or a mountain? It hides a resurrection in the collective grief of the faces in the crowd. Excuse me, sir, what time is the massacre? No tengo confianza en esta traducción. They look blank. They are performing the mountainness of the mountain. The bodies in the air breath death theater are trying to become the eternal embarrassment of nature. The disappearance of the most beautiful, miserable valley has been captured in the faces of the audience. The captured orangutan turns human when none of the captors are looking. The audience members come to watch the disappearance of their own bodies. They look out at the massacre road and see their bodies evaporating. A documentarian photographs their faces stuck in the mountain. The economists celebrate the macroscopic potential of the animal's human transformation. The audience members are stuck in the resurrection of the collective grief. By the river, the families weep with grief shame, and a voice sings backwards. I like the air breath death theater because it absorbs me. I like the air breath death theater because it spits me out into a reduction of blankness, a reduction of epiphany, an innovation of extermination, a reduction of massacre, an innovation of resurrection, a reduction of performance, an innovation of extermination, a reduction of epiphany, a reduction in the blankness of blank.
Thank you, Daniel. I want to start by drawing our attention to one line here. At the same time, I feel like I could draw the attention to many lines here. There are two moments, and perhaps I want to on-ramp using my experience as a writer, translator, mistranslator, distranslator of my own work. No tengo confianza en esta traducción, which literally translates to I have no faith in this translation. And so I'm curious, Daniel, as to what you think Spanish is performing in your work in general. I know that you're a very noted translator, a very noted poet, but how have you been able to make room for that other language that is very much a part of us, but which is seen at times as another language, like as an otherizing force by, say, readers in this country?
I want to just make one quick note too. Peter had mentioned that my last translation, but that was a second to last one. The last one is the Dear Book by Cecilia Vicuña. So please get that. And can you just repeat the very end of your question?
I guess it's I don't want to get distracted in the market, right? Industry, but it seems inescapable when we read your work, right? An understanding of how certain works of literature perform in the market of literature and in the market of art humanity. But I'm curious if you could elaborate on the introduction of Spanish into your work as a translator, as someone who speaks and thinks and loves in more than one language?
Yeah. I mean, I don't actually have that much Spanish in my work as a whole, or at least my own writing, as opposed to my translations. But in this book, there is a bit more, and I think for the most part, actually, it's not translated. There's some stuff that is translated, some stuff that is sort of mistranslated, but that it is. It is on its own and serving a different sort of commentary. I think that one of the things that has happened with my own writing and my own translation is that the two are sort of like mixed together in my own thinking about what writing is, so much that I feel like I think of my own writing as translation, and that it's not necessarily translation from like Spanish to English, though at times I suppose that is happening, but it is like translation from like breath to word, from body to word, and then like totally think of revision as being a translational process. So I think that is like the way I start to answer the question, is that for me, translation is, at least translation is like a writing process in my own work, as much as it is a process from taking Spanish to English, in sort of more direct translation. I think, like, to sort of get back to the original thrust of your question, which is like, what's Spanish doing in the text? I think that I want to sort of imagine in the text a kind of bilingual speaker, multilingual readership in a certain sense, that doesn't need to kind of explain the moving back and forth between languages. And I think that is what was happening a bit in that piece for me.
Thank you. I kept thinking as I read your book, reaching an understanding of myself as a reader, and understanding or asking myself how much of the world as we live it is a language operation, or a language occurrence, or a language event, and whether or not there is a way to sort of escape the linkage that the world seems to be creating for us, as we live in the world. But which brings me really to a point about data. One of the reasons I'm very grateful that you started with apparatus is that it comes across, right, as a list, right? It's more than a list, but it's a list poem in some ways. And so I was wondering how you went about accruing all this data and sort of like conducting it on the page. How you go about like building the poem per se, if this poem you think is sort of emblematic of the rest of the work.
There's a couple poems that are sort of like this one, in terms of being sort of that have that rhythm, I would say, that I like. It's I mean, the question sort of has two parts. One is like the voice of the poem, which in a way is like the harder thing to talk about, because I feel like the poem sort of becomes what the poem wants to become, and I like am a conduit for language, and don't always understand how it's becoming that. But and I will try to get to that. Like, the easier part is like how all the data comes in, and I'm kind of I really like to read texts that are in the sort of realm of I don't know, economics, cybernetics, of like management, in part because I'm sort of interested in the stuff. For this book, I was reading lots of things about the relationship between hedge funds and disaster, and trying to sort of understand. There's this whole sort of body of economic and financialization literature about how profitable hedge funds, the profitability of investing in disaster zones, without any kind of like tongue-in-cheek irony to it, just straight up like, how do we make money doing this? Is it profitable? What are the mechanisms by which hedge funds are able to profit from it? And so, you know, obviously there's like a critique of that, but actually, like as a poet, I'm more interested in the language of economics and data, and love its like multiple like the multiple syllabics of it. I love the strange poetics to it. And ultimately it becomes sort of combinatorial. I'm sure, like I was reading Vallejo and some of the later Vallejo poems as I was writing Apparatus number 519. And so I begin to kind of think in my head about how to like put together financialization, hedge funds, and Vallejo, and somehow wanting to like think of the poem as a sort of performance as well, and so I think that's how it got started. And
you know, it's there's a line I keep going back to as you make the argument for having, not make the argument, but talk about having been immersing yourself in the world of finance and the world of debt. And there is, you know, there is obviously the insinuation that that world is what's bringing about something like an apocalypse. And I keep wondering, what, in your estimation, would the role of the poet be? Because I also keep getting a bit of suspicion at the document, and what the document can perform. I don't want to have you read the first poem, but there is something about the way that a document is introduced that makes us wonder, wait a minute, is this what we should be doing? But anyway, to walk that question a little bit back, what can we do as writers, right? What argument are you trying to articulate for us readers about craft, about our responsibility, if responsibility is a word that we can take when even our tools are compromised?
I don't know. I mean, I think I'm squeamish about talking about the responsibility of maybe like the irresponsibility, the irresponsibility of writer. But you know, I'd like in, I don't know, 2010 or so, I interviewed Raul Zurita about Canto de su amor desaparecido, which I was translating at the time. And there's a quote from him that always stays with me, where he says something like, I wanted to, as and that book was published in the midst of the Chilean dictatorship in 1985. And he says something like, I wanted to make poetry as powerful as the pain being delivered by the state. And of course, that is a totally impossible goal. And I don't think he would have any problem saying that. But like as something that has driven me, at least to think that, like, for Raul, that has been a sort of driving force, and that has been something that I have wanted to drive my own poetry. And I don't mean to sort of say that I get anywhere near that, but as like an attempt, that seems to me a thing that one poet can try to do. I think I think that at the same time, right, like we have to somehow make art out of it, and art first and foremost, and like have some faith in art's ability at least to save our own lives in the very short term, and to give us some reason to survive when the apocalypse is giving us all kinds of reasons to think that survival is doomed. I say that with a smile.
Well, you know, there's the operative question, when will you be a human again? Which is not asked, not posed as a question, at least visually so. And the question, and I think that's a question that I can't tell from here because my glasses are a little bit foggy. Humanization and dehumanization. The question is like, well, I'm gonna post this as a question to you, and it's gonna be one of those complex COVID questions, which is, first of all, where would you put this book in the matrix of your work? And do you think you are, in a way, answering questions that previous books raised? Are we moving towards humanity?
I am indeed, like literally, and maybe you know this, but like I'm literally answering a question that appears at the end of Written After a Massacre in the year 2018, where I have like a series of lines that I'll just read that little bit. I'll just read from a poem called Written After the Massacre in the year 2018. The emigrants split their bodies into communal assets. To assimilate, they must stand by the river with a prophylactic angel in their hands disguised as a rocketing hedge fund. In the rupture, in the rubble, in the pathological eye sockets, in the counter-odyssey of the whites of your eyes, in the parliamentary assault rifle, the parliamentary machine gun splatter, the illegal bodies in cages are painted over by the analytics and mathematics of the hemisphere. How do you quantify the broken toddlers rolling on the ground? How do you quantify the murmuring grief of the Americas? So yeah, this book started as a like attempt to answer that question, and of course, to answer it as in as I don't know, as many different and strange ways as possible, but like to maintain an interest in quantification, and while also maintaining an interest in like the other parts of that, like murmuring as a sound, as a sort of repetitive sound, as like murder, mer, like the sea, mother, the sort of repetition of murmur and all these forms kept coming to me. And then grief. And again, thinking about, I feel like COVID gave us all these opportunities to sort of quantify grief in all of these ways that made humans into abstractions. So I think that's part of that's how I'd answer the answering the question part. I think like in the, I don't know, I think in the matrix of my work where this fits, I sort of feel like it's a separate book in time, but that and in materiality, but like I want to say that they're maybe all just one book, and that I would like to imagine sort of new forms for the book, and like books sort of rolling across sidewalks and through the sky, and expanding over thousands of pages, but that like that the books feel as if they are all written together and all of a piece, and that I don't know that I'm while you know maybe there's some newness or something like that, like the more I write, the more the books just feel like the book of my life rather than like separate books.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit, or can you, I'm very curious about the use of epigraphs throughout the book. There is, of course, for those who don't have it in front of them, Emily Dickinson, Lispector, Vallejo, etc. There is a translation of Dickinson too. So I was wondering, and there's Raquel Salas Rivera. There's a translation by Urayoan. One of the things I remember from my experience with you as a student, just briefly for 3 hours, was this compulsion to bring to us as we write mentors, the work of others, to question, challenge, write in parallel, write against, write through, etc. And so I was wondering if these voices, what these voices served, and also there's that beautiful moment where you turn Dickinson into notation. And so I was wondering what kind of discovery that brought to you.
I think the two things. I mean, one, like yes, the book, the poems are clearly responding to this range of writers. So Vallejo, Lispector, Dickinson, Roque, among others, who are helping us like think about debt in some cases, about death and survival. And I think how I tried to kind of arrange the books or the epigraphs to actually sort of become poems on the page, and like actually things that like I sort of want to perform as poems. So on the first page, I have the sort of mixing of Lispector and Dickinson. I shall miss myself so much when I die. Of glory, not a beam is left, but her eternal house. The asterisk is for the dead, the living for the stars. I shall miss myself so much when I die. Of glory, not a beam is left, but her eternal house. The asterisk is for the dead, the living for the stars. I shall miss myself so much when I die. So I wanted them to be not just like discrete lines outside of the text, but to actually be text. And so I think that was how I was trying to integrate them into the book. And for the question about sort of using visual signifiers for the asterisks and the stars in Dickinson, it just like felt as if Dickinson was this incredibly visual writer and visual for like a kind of internet keyboard cyber age, as much as for like the visual strangeness that is often going on in the minds of Dickinson characters as well.
Thank you. But let's not also forget that the book in itself starts with a murmuration of the title, right? And I keep thinking, right, like that explosion of murmur, which is a way in which perhaps some information, clandestine information, can be shared amongst people of a community. But also it could be a cardiac affront, right? It could be an introduction to a cardiac event. And I feel like the book keeps performing that in some ways, creating a community and also reminding perhaps, and this is a question I have, do you think that this is a book that attempts to or invites us? Complicity seems to be a book that's really a part of the book. The book wants you to know that the book is thinking about this. And I guess it goes back to I guess an earlier point I try to make about the real difficult nature of the document. How do we manage our complicity, right? And I don't know what kind of craft-based question is that, other than to say, can you elaborate on what you have been trying to accomplish in this book regarding the topic of complicity?
I think the way I think about it is that the poem you're mentioning towards the beginning as well, which is really like the narration of a film about children who are crossing the border, right? And the sort of choice to do that rather than to simply write about children crossing the border is precisely that, right? That like I feel as if the complicity is about like watching the representation and documenting the representation rather than actually documenting the event. And so that is like a way of both sort of acknowledging the, I don't know, both the perhaps like ethical as well as like logistical impossibility of writing from that point of view, but also reminding or like grounding me in the various ways that these experiences are brought to us through media. And so the writing becomes the writing about the writing of the writing, rather than like the actually trying to kind of say what the experience is about. The experience is about trying to understand our experience of the experience. And so I think that is like a way of handling, I guess, both complicity as well as the impossibility of writing about these various kinds of violences.
It also reminds me of the line towards the end. He sees a language he cannot build into his life. I want to ask a question about form, and then perhaps open it up to the audience. I feel like it's safe to say, Daniel, that you have crafted a form for yourself in your books, which allows your books to sort of like play around with recombination, right? It feels like, well, I was going to say a virus, but it's not really a virus. But then there is then the book closes with something a little bit more enclosed, right? And so can you walk us through the process of arranging this book and landing with The Murmuring Grief of the Americas as a closing series?
I think probably in the writing of the book, those pieces came and towards the beginning of when I was writing the work, and that they somehow found, in some ways, like that last section that you're referring to is the most kind of distinct or separate and kind of writing from the others. You know, I often think that like the structure of like writers worry a lot about the structure, like poets worry a lot about the structure of books, and I often like wonder how much of that is for themselves rather than for readers. I have more to say about that. But like section wise, I was trying to kind of go, so the sections are titled "When Will I Be Human Again? When Will We Be Human Again? When Will You Be Human Again? When Will They Be Human Again? Sustainable Growth and the Murmuring Grief of the Americas." And I was trying very much to kind of think about this movement from I to we to you to they, to again a kind of like sustainable growth as a concept both in finance and in ecology, and to kind of think about those things. So like moving from individual to other to collective to like a state of both like I don't know, environment as well as economy. And I think that was part of what I was thinking about with the structure of the book.
That's clear to me. Now I'm curious about what you know, a poet's expectation of order versus a reader's expectation of it. Ordering manuscript ordering, but
yeah, I mean, I have no idea. I feel like as readers, like we often don't read linearly, right? And so like we spend a lot of like writers, we spend a lot of time like ordering books in a linear way, but I feel like it often doesn't correspond with how I actually read collections of poetry. And so I don't like know what to do about that problem because I'm sort of stuck with like the materiality of the book. And I suppose you could do, you know, try something like a Cortázar or something like that, and to think of like multiple ways of ordering a book. But even then, you're still like in the linearity of and kind of materialness of the book. Should I read one piece and then like let's go to questions?
Please do.
All right, I will read one shorter piece of a sort of different voice than some of the others, and then all right. We are in the future now. I dreamt I was baking an apple pie, and in the dream I woke up and you said, "Your dreams are so good I can smell them." They shot some last night. No one knows how many died. We are saddened by this senseless loss of. When I speak to you sincerely, it may seem like I'm talking about mercy, but everyone knows that in Chicago, dying is not the same as dying. I was thinking about the old cliche, the one where the starving man peels off his skin and eats himself, then gets indigestion because he ate so fast and didn't drink enough water. Whiny journalists always asking questions like, how many people died here yesterday? How many corpses did they burn? Revolution or brunch, not as simple as it sounds. They say it's okay to enjoy things when the world is exploding. I'm not so sure I believe them. The police state austerity surveillance machines stopped spying on themselves when they realized the only step left was to report their own bodies to the censors. And the bureaucrats sing, we are in the future now. We are in the future now. I don't really care for any of the years, decades, or centuries. I don't like states, countries, or nations, and I'm not a fan of time, religion, justice, culture, literary movements, schools of painting or philosophy, the commons, the archives, semantics, rhetoric, politics, the ego, the id, the public self, the private self, oratory, syntax, or grammar, among other things. The history of this road is Massacre A, then Massacre B, Expansion, Peace Treaty, Truth, Reconciliation, Resurrection, Massacre C, then Massacre D, Rhetorical Guilt, Legal Challenges, Truth, Reconciliation, Hypocrisy, Massacre E, then Massacre F, period. You can have an inspiring studio session in Emily Dickinson's bedroom in Amherst for $300 for 1 hour or $500 for 2 hours, or two people can rent it out for $400 for 1 hour or $600 for 2 hours. Food and drink must be left outside the room. The door will remain open. Staff will be present at all times. At Sophie's Choice, custom gifts and more in Niagara Falls, you can buy a maternity shirt that says, expecting our first little pumpkin. At Sophie's Choice Shop, an online retailer servicing Serbia, Montenegro, Croatia, Bosnia, and Herzegovina, you can buy makeup and fake eyelashes. At Boutique Le Choix de Sophie in Alma, Quebec, you can buy, quote, everything for your wardrobe from head to toe. At Sophie's Choice Clothing, an online secondhand shop from the UK, you can buy tunics, strappy dresses, and fashionable outfits for the office. When he said I was asleep at the wheel, what he thought I meant was that I was sleeping on the side of the road, which I thought of as dying on the side of the road, or even just sleeping on the side of death.
Thank you.
Sure.
So I have a question from, I believe this is Kristen Dykstra. So that question, rehumanization versus dehumanization, is, I think, a question about what happens with that movement from individual to collective to what lies beyond collective, the environment. More or less wondering about that place where Daniel ended one of his last comments.
I wonder what you're wondering about, Chris. Hi, Chris. I think this book was dealing perhaps with environment in a way, in a kind of sort of more explicit way than some of the previous. That's okay. Though you're welcome to just use your voice if you would like as well. Than some of the other books, right? And to be thinking not just about like environmental decay or the Anthropocene, but to be thinking about how the like interconnectivity between environment, migration, urban violence, financialization, and language all at the same time. And so I think that is how I'd begin to kind of try to sort all of that out, and to say that, like, if I feel like I'm writing from anywhere in the book, it is maybe like from the ground, or from like the murmuring space of the I don't know, of the buried speaker in the earth. Hi, Chris.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah.
we can.
Oh, good. Okay. Yeah. So in a way, Daniel, my real question was, it's always like, damn it, how did you do that? you know, and then it sort of proceeds from there, and it touches on some of the things that Ricky was saying. But, you know, whenever I hear people raise the topic dehumanization, the response is usually, let's get closer up and humanize someone, right? And I can't help but think every time I hear your work that it's like, that's like a telescoping, right? We're like sort of telescoping towards someone and making them fill the screen. And it's like you flipped the telescope over and you're like, no, we're going to get farther and farther away. And I guess the reason I'm interested in that environment is it feels more like Bolaño's landscape where people just sort of march into the earth and disappear and end up where you said, right? And I guess I'm kind of wondering, it almost feels like ceremonial or like staying in a sort of motion as an endpoint, rather than what we often hear as, okay, well, we'll address this issue, right? And so I think it does come around to what does it mean to be complicit as well. So it's kind of riffing off everything that Ricky was asking you.
Yeah, I mean, now that I think about the question a little bit, like, I mean, humanization versus dehumanization, right? Like, humanization is never, at least for me and my books, like a good thing. That like we have we hold both like the human and the humanities up to this I don't know, humanistically exalted status, right? And I think so I think often like a dehumanizing in the book is yes, maybe like not treating people like humans, right? But also saying like humans don't treat each other the way we think humans behave, right? So to think that it's like the sort of wrong premise to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
We have time, I guess, for one last question. If anyone wants to jump in and ask, you may raise your hand. Or Daniel, if there's anything you'd like to share with the rest of us.
Share with the rest of you. Maybe just reiterating to please support East Bay booksellers. The link is up there. And we have a
Lara Mimosa. I believe that's
Lara. Hi, Lara.
Which poem was the most fun to write?
There is a poem called, which I find it really hard to read just because it's long, called How I Wrote Certain of My Books, which of course takes its title from Raymond Roussel's How I Wrote Certain of My Books. But that in some ways was like a poem where I was sort of laying out like my own poetics in through the guise of a kind of mysterious poet / workshop leader, and that poem was maybe I can read a tiny bit of it. I'm just looking for it. Page 82. That poem was the result of like a 60-page prose piece that then became shrunk down to like 4 or 5 pages after like setting aside the long 60-page thing for a couple of years. And so I think like the distance between those two things allowed for me to kind of shred it up in ways that were really fun. I'll read a little bit of it. I'll skip around maybe if that is okay. And we can say good night. How I Wrote Certain of My Books. I met the poet before he disappeared. The timeline of events doesn't make sense. I don't think you are lying, but I suspect there are gaps, elisions, important details you're not disclosing. You have a way of speaking that doesn't allow me to ask questions. Are you like this with everyone? You keep the people you love most at a distance, drawing them in when they talk about themselves, yet holding back when they want to know more about you. I met the poet in a writing workshop he offered out of his home. I was one of 4 students in his class. There was one student who never spoke and never turned in any writing, and the poet loved her because the silent student understood that the ultimate form of poetry was silence, and we also all saw something sublime in her refusal to acknowledge even the most basic forms of communal norms and discourse. Another student was a father of 3 kids. He owned a small business and was, quote, doing something for himself for a change. Austerity measures have forced me to abandon aesthetic or narrative unity. I work too much and I don't have time to write anymore, and it limits my creativity and coherence. I cut my budge by 25%, and now I can't even finish. The poet's preferred way of signing books was, quote, greetings from the land of anti-value. Like all good poets, the poet hated his own poetry. I loved his first book, but he thought that all of the poems were cheap imitations of Renee Char and Gertrude Stein. All poets should hate their own poetry, said the poet. You should never be able to look at your own poetry without feeling utterly repulsed. If you're proud of your own poetry or enjoy reading your own poetry, then you need to figure out how to write poems that will offend yourself just a little bit more, quote, robustly. The father of 3 who was doing something for himself for a change wrote epic poems about his childhood. The poet referred to the father of three's poems as sociopathic imitations of Frank O'Hara, only more interesting. They were horror stories, frankly, and none of us knew how to respond to them. The poet loved that we didn't know how to respond to the father of 3's poems. He thought the best response to a poem was to feel like, what the fuck did I just read? I don't have a fucking idea what I just read. What did I just read? Do you understand remotely what I just read? What the fuck am I reading? And it appeared that the father of 3 met this standard of what the fuckery in his epic poem about a man, now a poet, of course, who watched his mother kill his father when he was a child. Did the father of 3's mother actually kill his father? Fuck you, said the father of 3. I'm not telling. Probably not, but every once in a while his poems would contain the kind of detail, a line from a coroner's report or a snippet from a newspaper article that led us to think that something along those lines must have happened. The father of 3 was kind and cheerful and always showed up to the workshop with wine or cookies or cake. The poet would give advice like, fuck doing new things. You're a writer, not an iPhone. You don't need a constant update. You don't need to keep changing your algorithm. The other student in the workshop was an attorney, and she was about to retire. Her favorite poets were H.D. and Sylvia Plath, and she knew almost every detail of Greek mythology, which often served as tropes in her poems. She wrote poems that possessed what the poet once called, quote, a subtle hint of bureaucratic eroticism. She was terrified of retiring and was, quote, pursuing poetry because she wanted to make sure she had plenty of activities to keep her mind from atrophying in her retirement. And so she designed complex mazes of poems that were impossible to work their way out of. And the poet would ask her questions like, what does this poem hate? What does this poem love? How can you make this poem hate more lovingly and love more hatingly? I was the other student in the workshop, and I hated writing poems that looked like poems, so the poet thought I had the right attitude about poetry, even if my poems were didactic or bland or facile. It's not that I'm a bad writer, the critic wrote about my last book. Rather, I appear to be writing as a bad writer on purpose. And I'll stop there. And that last line is actually a direct quote from my favorite review of my own work, which was actually a very bad review, where the writer said, it's not that Borzutzky's a bad writer, it's that he appears to be writing as a bad writer on purpose. So from then on, I've just tried to add, well, I'll read the next stanza. I never thought of myself as being a bad writer on purpose, but as soon as the critic said this, a light bulb went off. I must think of myself as being a bad writer on purpose, and then everything changed. I wrote a bad book on purpose, and it was the best book I ever wrote, and I won a big prize, and I was invited to give a reading at Harvard. So anyway, I've tried to embody my criticisms and tried to make a poetic stuff.
Thank you for closing us with that poem. Thank you, Lara, for that question. And I do encourage people who have the courage to look at their reviewers and take some of that language and use it in further work, which is something I've done too recently. Peter, anything you want to share?
I want to thank you both for gracing our halls. That was a pleasure. It means a great deal. To actually get you into the house someday will be something that we look forward to. And thank you, Ricardo, for doing the honors tonight. Really appreciate it. And Daniel, thank you for all that you do, and congratulations for this remarkable collection. Also want to remind everyone, we have posted links with which you may purchase books from both. And, better yet, if you're in the neighborhood, come on down, browse our stacks. We have one of the largest poetry and translation selections in the country. We're, of course, one of the Bay Area's great browsing experiences. We're located in San Francisco's historic North Beach district. We're open from 10 a.m. to 10 p.m., getting back to our pre-pandemic hours. Today's event has been made possible by support from the City Lights Foundation, continuing the legacy of our founder, the late Lawrence Ferlinghetti, through public events like this one, our publishing program, our educational outreach, all dedicated to sustaining a vibrant community of readers, writers, and critical thinkers. So take care, everyone. Be well, be kind to each other. We hope to see you all again soon. Gentlemen, once again, thank you.
Oh, thank you, Peter. Thank you, Ricky, and thank you, everyone, so much for coming. I wish I was in a room with all of you now, but thank you.
Have a good one. Stay safe, everyone.
Ciao, ciao.
Bye.
Bye.